The rented tuxedo was a cage made of cheap polyester. It chafed at my neck, the shoulders were too tight, and the whole ensemble smelled faintly of industrial cleaning chemicals and someone else's forgotten optimism. I stood under the sprawling arms of an ancient oak tree, a flute of lukewarm champagne sweating in my hand, and watched my brother, Mark, live his perfect life. It was his wedding day. I was his best man. My only real duty, besides handing over a ring I was currently terrified of losing, was to stand here and look appropriately fraternal and pleased. I was failing at the second part. It wasn't that I disliked Anna, my brother's bride-to-be. In the handful of times we'd met at excruciatingly planned family dinners, she'd seemed contained. A beautiful, quiet woman with intelligent eyes that seemed to be observing everything from a great distance. Mark had presented her like a prize he'd won at the world's most exclusive fair. "Isn't she incredible?" he'd boom, slinging an arm around her shoulders, while she offered a tight, polite smile. She was a graphic designer, something Mark translated to "she's artistic" with a dismissive wave, as if it were a quaint hobby like macrame. Liam, was the other brother, the older, quieter, less shiny one. At 34, my life was a collection of things I'd built with my own two hands. My house, a converted barn on the edge of town, was my sanctuary. My business, a custom woodworking shop that occupied the ground floor of that barn, was my pride. I took rough slabs of maple and walnut and cherry and found the tables and chairs and bookcases hidden inside them. It was a slow, deliberate process. It was tangible. It made sense. My life, according to my most recent ex, Claire, was also dependable but dull. Her parting words, delivered with a kind of gentle pity that was worse than anger, had become the defining text of my romantic life. "You're just safe, Liam," she'd said, standing in the doorway of a life we'd shared for 3 years. "You're like a beautifully made, very comfortable chair. But I need to go see if there's a roller coaster somewhere." You understand, I did. I understood perfectly. I was the comfortable chair. Mark was the roller coaster. He was a high-flying real estate agent who sold glass-walled penthouses to people with more money than taste. He drove a German sports car that was always just washed. His teeth were professionally, blindingly white. He didn't build things, he acquired them. And today, he was acquiring Anna. I took a sip of the terrible champagne and watched them pose for another photo. The photographer was cooing, telling them to look at each other with love. Mark's smile was wide, practiced, perfect for the camera. Anna's was a fragile, fleeting thing. From this distance, I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers were clenched around her bouquet of white peonies. She looked like a marble statue of a bride, breathtakingly beautiful and utterly frozen. The whole event was suffocating. The manicured lawns of the country club, the string quartet sawing away at some pop song rendition, the air thick with expensive perfume, and the low hum of competitive small talk. It was Mark's world, not mine. I felt like I was wearing a costume, playing a part one hadn't been given a script for. My skin itched. The sawdust under my fingernails, a permanent feature of my existence, felt more honest than the starched white cuffs of my shirt. I needed to escape, just for a minute. Muttering an excuse to a distant cousin I barely recognized, I slipped away from the main lawn, my polished rental shoes crunching on a gravel path. I bypassed the main parking lot, a glittering sea of imported luxury, and headed for the staff and overflow lot around the back. That's where my truck was. My old, reliable, slightly dented Ford F-150. It was a decade old, the color of a stormy sky, and the cab smelled of wood shavings, coffee, and dog. My dog, Buster, a golden retriever of questionable parentage and unwavering loyalty, wasn't with me, but his scent was a comforting presence. The truck was an extension of me, practical, unpretentious, and built to work. Seeing it there, parked between a catering van and a gardener's rusty pickup, was like finding a friend in a hostile country. I didn't even plan on going anywhere. I just wanted to sit inside it for a moment, to breathe air that wasn't perfumed, to feel the familiar worn leather of the steering wheel under my hands. I unlocked it with a satisfying thunk, the sound cutting through the distant, saccharine music. I slid into the driver's seat and just sat there, the silence of the cab a balm on my frayed nerves. I leaned my head back against the headrest and closed my eyes. For a glorious 30 seconds, there was no wedding, no brother, no memory of Claire calling me a piece of furniture. There was just the quiet hum of my own world. The sound of a door being yanked open shattered the peace. It wasn't my door. It was the rear passenger side door. I jolted upright, my heart hammering against my ribs, my mind flashing to a million unlikely scenarios. My eyes flew to the rearview mirror. And then she was inside. A tidal wave of white silk and tulle and lace flooded the back seat of my truck. It was Anna, my brother's bride. Her hair, which had been sculpted into an impossibly intricate updo, was coming undone, tendrils of dark brown framing a face that was pale and wild-eyed. Her mascara had run, leaving faint gray tracks on her cheeks. The bottom of her magnificent dress was stained with mud and grass. She scrambled in, pulling the voluminous skirt in after her like she was trying to hide a cloud. She slammed the door shut, the sound echoing the finality of a gavel. The cab was instantly filled with her. The scent of her peony bouquet, crushed and fading, mingled with the smell of rain-damp earth and the faint, clean scent of her skin. She was breathing hard, her chest rising and falling in sharp, ragged gasps. I stared at her in the rearview mirror, my brain refusing to process the image. The beautiful, contained woman from the altar was gone. In her place was a cornered animal, a storm trapped in a human body. Her eyes, wide and luminous and terrifyingly alive, met mine in the mirror. "Drive," she said. Her voice wasn't the polite, soft murmur I'd heard at family dinners. It was a raw, desperate command, a plea and an order all at once. I just stared, mute and uncomprehending. My mouth opened, but no words came out. She leaned forward, the rustle of her dress filling the cab. "Please," she whispered, and the word cracked in the middle. "Just drive, and don't take me back." My mind was a blank slate. Every logical thought, every consideration of family and duty and consequence had been wiped clean by the sheer, unadulterated panic in her eyes. My brother, the wedding, my parents, all of it dissolved into meaningless noise. All that existed was the woman in the back of my truck and her two-word command. "Drive." My hands, acting of their own accord, found the keys in the ignition. The engine turned over with a familiar, rumbling growl. I put the truck in gear, my movements stiff and automatic. I didn't look back toward the sprawling green lawn where 150 people were waiting for a bride who was currently hiding in my back seat. I just drove. I pulled out of the staff lot and turned onto the service road, away from the main entrance. My mind was still struggling to catch up with my body. This was insane. This was catastrophic. This was my brother's wedding day. His bride. In my truck. This was the kind of thing that didn't just cause a family argument. It redrew the family map entirely. I was driving myself directly into exile. And yet, I kept driving. The back roads around the country club were a spiderweb of cracked asphalt and gravel I knew like the grain of a piece of oak. I'd driven them 1,000 times, seeking solitude after a long day in the shop. Now they were our escape route. The string music faded, replaced by the crunch of tires on loose stones and the frantic, quiet sound of Anna's breathing. The cab was a surreal bubble of reality. The sheer volume of her dress seemed to suck up all the space, all the air. It was a physical manifestation of the moment she was running from, a huge, beautiful, cumbersome burden she dragged with her. I could smell the crushed flowers and damp earth, a scent of ruined ceremony. I drove for 10 minutes in absolute silence, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. My internal monologue was a screaming match between panic and a strange, unnerving calm. "What are you doing? Turn around. This is Mark's life you're wrecking." In a quieter voice underneath, she asked for help. "You're helping." Finally, I had to speak. My voice felt rusty. Where were we going? In the rearview mirror, I saw her shake her head. A single, sharp movement. "Away," she breathed. "I don't know. Just not back there." "Anna," I started, the name feeling foreign and dangerous on my tongue. "What happened?" She let out a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. It was a brittle, broken noise. What happened is I almost made the biggest mistake of my life. I was standing there, listening to the officiant talk about partnership and union, and I looked at Mark. He wasn't looking at me. He was smiling at the crowd, at his parents. He was looking at his perfect day, his perfect picture, and I was just the last piece he had to put in place. Her voice was low and steady now, the panic receding into a cold, hard clarity. He's been planning this wedding at me for a year. The flowers, the food, the guest list. I'd say I liked daisies, and he'd hear peonies are more classic. I'd say I wanted a small gathering, and he'd say, but the Martins would be offended. He never listened. He just waited for me to stop talking so he could tell me what was going to happen. I stayed silent, letting her talk. I thought of the few conversations I'd had with her, always interrupted by Mark, who would answer for her or steer the topic back to himself. I just assumed she was shy. It had never occurred to me that she was being systematically silenced. I felt like I was suffocating. She continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. Right there at the altar, I couldn't breathe, and I had this sudden, terrifying vision of my entire life. Every dinner party, every vacation, every holiday, just me, smiling and nodding, while he curated our existence. I couldn't do it. I just couldn't. She looked up, her gaze meeting mine in the mirror again. I saw you leaving, heading for the parking lot. It was like a sign, the sensible one, the one with the truck, the escape hatch, the sensible one, the comfortable chair. Even in her moment of crisis, that's what I was. But she hadn't called me safe or boring. She'd called me an escape hatch. There was a subtle, vital difference. An escape hatch is an active thing. A chair is not. Okay, I said, my voice firmer now. I had a purpose. She needed a plan, and planning was something I was good at. Okay, we need to get you out of that dress. And we need to go somewhere you won't be found. Not right away. I don't have anywhere to go, she said, the fight seeming to drain out of her for a moment. My apartment lease is up. My things are in boxes in Mark's garage, ready to be moved into his house. My parents are there. My friends are there. She gestured vaguely behind us, towards the life she'd just detonated. I made a decision. It was reckless and stupid, and probably the most alive I'd felt in 5 years. I have a place, I said. It's quiet. It's private. No one will think to look for you there. She didn't ask where. She just nodded, a small, grateful dip of her chin. Okay. I turned the truck onto the main road, heading out of the wealthy suburbs and toward the rural stretch of land where I'd built my life. My workshop. My home. The one place that was entirely mine. Taking her there felt like I was letting her into my own head. It was terrifying, and it was the only thing I could think to do. The barn came into view as I crested the last hill. It stood tall and gray against the afternoon sky, a 100-year-old structure I had painstakingly gutted and rebuilt. The ground floor was the workshop with its massive rolling doors. The top floor was my apartment, with a wall of windows overlooking the woods behind the property. It was my fortress of solitude, and I was about to invite in the single biggest complication of my entire life. I pulled the truck up the gravel driveway and killed the engine. The silence that descended was different from the silence in the truck. It was a living quiet, filled with the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. This is it, I said, gesturing to the barn. It's not much, but it's safe. Anna stared at it through the windshield, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she didn't move. She just looked at the solid, weathered wood of the barn, the clean lines of the new windows I'd installed, the stacks of lumber piled neatly under a lean-to. Then she took a deep breath. It's perfect, she said softly. Getting her out of the truck was a logistical challenge. The dress, which had seemed so ethereal at the church, was now a cumbersome, muddy mess. She struggled with the layers, her movements clumsy with exhaustion. Here, I said, getting out and opening her door. Let me help. I reached in and took her hand. Her skin was cold. I helped her step down onto the gravel, my other hand instinctively going her waist to steady her. The fabric of the dress was cool and slick under my palm, the boning of the corset rigid beneath it. It was a bizarrely intimate gesture, holding my brother's runaway bride by the waist in my driveway. A jolt, something like electricity, shot up my arm. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned. She didn't seem to notice. Her focus was on navigating the terrain. I led her to the side door that opened onto a small mudroom, and then directly into the main workshop space. I punched in the code and swung the heavy door open. The smell of sawdust and wood stain and oil washed over us. It was the scent of my life, of my labor. The vast, open space of the workshop was bathed in the golden light of the late afternoon, dust motes dancing in the sunbeams slanting down from the high windows. My tools were hung in precise, orderly rows on the walls. A half-finished bookshelf stood on a workbench in the center of the room, its joints perfectly aligned. To me, it was organized and peaceful. I suddenly wondered what she saw. A mess? A construction zone? And I stopped just inside the doorway and looked around. Her eyes, the same intelligent eyes I'd noticed at those family dinners, swept over the space. She took in the neatly coiled extension cords, the gleaming blades of the table saw, the raw, beautiful chaos of a project in motion. Wow, she breathed, and it wasn't the polite, dismissive wow of someone humoring a hobbyist. It was a sound of genuine appreciation. You did all this? Most of it, I said, feeling a flush of something that might have been pride. It was a derelict wreck when I bought it. It's incredible, she said, turning to look at me. And for the first time, I felt like she was really seeing me, Liam, and not just Mark's brother or the guy with the getaway truck. It's so solid. Real. Before I could respond, my phone, which I'd forgotten was in my pocket, began to buzz violently. The screen lit up with a picture of Mark, grinning his perfect, white-toothed grin. Reality came crashing back in. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the decline button. Every instinct I had, honed by years of being the responsible older brother, screamed at me to answer it, to smooth things over, to manage the situation. Anna's eyes were on me. She didn't say a word, but her gaze was a tangible force. It was a test. Was I Mark's brother, or was I her escape hatch? I pressed the red button, silencing the call. Then, for good measure, I switched the phone to silent and shoved it deep into my pocket. The small smile that touched her lips was worth the family war I had just unofficially declared. Upstairs, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I have an apartment. You can figure things out there. There's a shower. I'll find you something to wear. She nodded, gathering the soiled hem of her dress in her hands. Thank you, Liam. I led her up the sturdy wooden staircase I'd built myself. As her hand trailed along the smooth, polished grain of the railing, I felt an absurd sense of satisfaction. It was a good railing. I had made it, and now it was helping her. It was a ridiculous thought, but it was there. The apartment was a single, large, open-plan room with a small kitchen, a living area, and a bed tucked into an alcove. It was clean, sparse, and masculine. A few books on a shelf, a worn leather armchair, a framed photograph of a mountain range I'd hiked. It was the complete antithesis of the frilly, over-decorated world she had just fled. The bathroom's through there, I said, pointing. I'll find you some clothes. I retreated to my closet, my mind racing. What do you give a runaway bride to wear? I own jeans, t-shirts, and sweatshirts. I pulled out my softest, most worn gray sweatshirt, the one I wore on cold mornings in the shop, and a pair of black sweatpants that would be ridiculously long on her, but were the best I could do. I left them folded on the bed, along with a fresh towel. I'll be downstairs. I called through the closed bathroom door, feeling intensely awkward. Take your time. I retreated to the workshop, the vast space suddenly feeling too big and too quiet. I walked over to the half-finished bookshelf and ran my hand over the smooth plane of a maple shelf. I was in so much trouble. Mark would be apoplectic. My parents, who prized family unity and appearances above all else, would be horrified. I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and I didn't regret it. For years, I had been the steady, predictable foundation upon which my family, especially Mark, had built their dramas. I was the one who co-signed his first car loan, the one who helped him move apartments 5 times in 5 years, the one who listened patiently to his endless monologues about his conquests, both professional and personal. My role was to be reliable. My role was to be the background. But when Anna had looked at me with those desperate eyes, she hadn't seen the background. She'd seen a way forward. And in helping her, I felt like I was finally moving too. My phone started vibrating in my pocket again. I pulled it out. A string of missed calls from Mark. Then one from my mother. Then another from Mark. A text message popped up. Where are you? Where is she? Call me now, Liam, I swear to God. I read the words, the anger practically radiating off the screen. The old Liam would have been filled with anxiety, already rehearsing his apology, his explanation. But the new Liam, the one who had just committed an act of familial treason, just felt a weary calm. I heard the water shut off upstairs. A few minutes later, the floorboards creaked. I looked up toward the staircase as she appeared. She was swimming in my clothes. The sweatshirt hung off her shoulders, the sleeves rolled up multiple times. The sweatpants were bunched around her ankles. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup. Her dark hair was damp and falling around her shoulders in soft waves. And she looked more beautiful, more real, than she ever had in her designer gowns and perfect makeup. She was holding the wedding dress. It was a defeated heap of fabric in her arms. She looked down at it, then back at me, a wry, sad smile on her face. What do you do with a 100-pound, $10,000 mistake? She asked. I didn't have an answer for that. So I just pointed to an empty corner of the workshop. We can put it over there for now. She carried it down the stairs and laid it carefully on the floor, a pool of ruined elegance on the dusty concrete. It looked like a fallen cloud, a ghost. Just as she straightened up, a furious pounding rattled the main rolling door of the workshop. It wasn't a knock. It was a fist hammering on metal. Liam, open this damn door. I know you're in there. I know she's with you. It was Mark. His voice was distorted by the metal, but the rage was unmistakable. Anna flinched, her whole body going rigid. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a fresh wave of fear. The cornered animal was back. Something cold and hard settled in my gut. It wasn't fear. It was anger. A slow-burning, quiet anger I rarely ever felt. He wasn't yelling at me. He was yelling through me at her. He was treating my home, my sanctuary, like it was just another one of his possessions he had a right to enter. I put a hand on her arm. Stay here, I said, my voice low. I'll handle this. I walked the length of the workshop to the smaller, man-sized door set into the wall. The pounding continued, insistent and arrogant. I took a deep breath, turned the deadbolt, and opened the door. Mark stood there, a thundercloud in a tuxedo. His tie was loosened, his perfect hair was slightly disheveled, and his face was flushed a deep, ugly red. He looked past me, trying to peer into the workshop. Where is she? He spat, trying to push his way inside. I didn't move. I just stood there, my body blocking the doorway. I was broader than him, more solid, not from a gym, but from years of lifting lumber and wrestling with machinery. For the first time in our lives, my physical presence was an advantage, not just a fact. She doesn't want to see you, Mark, I said. My voice was quiet, level. Don't give me that crap, he snarled. What did you say to her? You've always been jealous, lurking in the background. You saw your chance, and you took it. He was trying to make it about me, about some imagined sibling rivalry. It was easier for him to believe I had stolen her than to believe she had willingly left him. This isn't about me, I said, keeping my voice calm. This is about her. She made a choice. You need to respect that. You need to leave. Respect it? He laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. She's my bride. We're getting married. Or we were, until you pulled this stunt. Now get out of my way. He put a hand on my chest to shove me aside. It was a mistake. I didn't shove back. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood my ground. It was like he had pushed against a stone wall. He stumbled back a step, surprised by my solidity. His arrogance faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by confusion. He had never encountered resistance from me before. Not like this. I'm not going to say it again, Mark, I said, my voice dropping even lower. Leave. Now. We stared at each other for a long moment. The golden child and the quiet craftsman. The roller coaster and the comfortable chair. But the chair wasn't feeling so comfortable anymore. It was feeling immovable. He saw something in my eyes he'd never seen before. Not anger, not jealousy, but a finality. A line drawn in the sand. He opened his mouth, then closed it. With a final, disgusted glare, he spun on his heel. This isn't over, he threw over his shoulder as he stalked back to his gleaming sports car, parked incongruously on the gravel. You hear me, Liam? This is not over. I watched him go, the engine of his car roaring to life and spitting gravel as he peeled out of my driveway. I stayed there until the sound faded completely, leaving only the peaceful quiet of the countryside. Then I closed the door, locked it, and leaned my forehead against the cool, solid wood. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. When I turned around, Anna was standing in the middle of the workshop, her arms wrapped around herself. She was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. It was a mix of awe and something else, something deeper. He's never been afraid of you before, she said, her voice soft. I gave a short, humorless laugh. He's not afraid of me. He's just not used to me saying no. No, that's not it, she insisted, taking a step closer. He's always seen you as the guy who just fixes things for him, the one who makes problems go away. But you weren't fixing anything just now. You were protecting something. She stopped a few feet from me, her gaze direct and incredibly perceptive. It felt like she was looking right through the layers of quiet reliability I'd wrapped myself in for years. He thinks your quiet is weakness, she said, her voice barely a whisper now. I think it's where you keep all your strength. And with those words, a crack appeared in the foundation of the man I thought I was. For the first time in a very long time, I felt seen, truly seen, not as a function, not as a comparison to my brother, but as myself, the quiet man, the one who kept his strength hidden away. And the feeling was terrifying and exhilarating, and it knocked the breath right out of my lungs. The aftermath of Mark's departure left a strange hum in the air of the workshop. It was the vibration of a boundary being drawn and defended. We were two co-conspirators in a crime of emotion, holed up in our hideout. The world outside, with its expectations and its furious, jilted groom, felt miles away, held at bay by the solid wood of the barn walls. Anna finally broke the silence. I should call my parents. The thought was like a bucket of cold water. Her parents. His parents. The whole web of family that we had just gleefully torn. Are you sure you want to do that right now? I asked, my voice gentle. They're still there. At the venue. With him. I have to, she said, her jaw setting with a resolve that I was beginning to recognize as a core part of her. I can't let him be the only one telling the story. They'll think he's the victim. They'll think you kidnapped me. She had a point. Mark would waste no time painting himself as the wrong party and me as the serpent in the garden. My phone is dead, she added, looking around as if one might magically appear. I pulled my own phone from my pocket. It felt like handing her a weapon. Use mine. Just be prepared. They're going to be in the middle of the storm. She took the phone, her fingers brushing mine. Another small jolt. I ignored it. I busied myself with making coffee, needing a simple mechanical task to occupy my hands. I filled the kettle, scooped grounds into the French press, the familiar rituals a small anchor in the swirling chaos of the day. I could hear her voice from the other side of the workshop, low and steady. I tried not to listen, focusing on the gurgle of the water as it heated. But snippets of the conversation drifted over. No, Mom, I'm fine. I'm safe. I couldn't do it. Please just listen. It's not about Liam. No, he didn't. I asked him to. It sounded exhausting. She was calm, but the person on the other end was clearly not. I could imagine the scene at the country club, the confused guests, the frantic parents, the beautiful, untouched wedding cake. We hadn't just run away. We had detonated a bomb in the middle of 150 lives. When she finally ended the call, she looked drained. She walked over and sank onto a stool by my workbench, resting her forehead in her hand. Well, she sighed, that was about as bad as I expected. My mother thinks I've had a psychotic break. My father wants to send a search party, and they both think you're some kind of Svengali who lured me away. And what did you tell them? I asked, pouring the hot water over the coffee grounds. The truth, she said, looking up at me. that I made a choice, that I'm okay, that I need some space. I told them I'm with you, and that I'm here because I want to be. She paused. I hope that was okay. To say that. It's the truth, I said simply, and the ease with which I said it surprised me. It was the truth. I pushed a steaming mug of coffee across the workbench to her. She wrapped her cold hands around it, a grateful look in her eyes. We sat in silence for a while, sipping our coffee, the rich, dark smell mingling with the scent of sawdust. It felt surprisingly normal. Domestic even, a man and a woman, sharing coffee in a kitchen, except the kitchen was a workshop and the woman was wearing my sweatshirt and had run away from her wedding a few hours ago. The next morning brought a fragile, uncertain peace. The world hadn't ended. The sun came up. I woke early, as I always did, and went downstairs. The wedding dress was still in the corner, a surreal reminder of the previous day's madness. For a moment, I wondered if I had dreamed it all. Then I heard movement from the apartment above, and the reality of it settled in again. Anna was here, in my house. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when she came down the stairs. She had slept in the clothes I'd given her, and her hair was a beautiful mess. She looked young and vulnerable, and my first instinct was a fierce, protective urge that was entirely new to me. "Morning," she said, her voice husky with sleep. "Is there any more of that?" She gestured to my coffee mug. "Always," I said, getting up to pour her a cup. Just as I handed it to her, we were interrupted by the sound of a car coming up the driveway. Not the angry roar of Mark's sports car, but something more sedate. We both froze, looking at each other. I peered out a window. It was Mark's car again, but his approach was different this time. He parked neatly, got out, and walked to the door not with rage, but with a kind of theatrical solemnity. He was carrying a massive bouquet of roses. "Oh no," Anna whispered, backing away from the door. "Round two," I muttered. Different strategy. A soft, polite knock this time. "Anna? Honey? It's me. Can we please talk?" "I'm not angry. I was just shocked, worried. I'm so sorry for how I acted yesterday." His voice was smooth, conciliatory. The voice of a salesman closing a difficult deal. He was playing the part of the heartbroken, repentant fiancé. It was a performance, and I could see right through it. I glanced at Anna. She could too. Her face was a mask of weary disbelief. "Anna, please," he continued through the door. "This is crazy. We can fix this. Whatever it is, we can fix it. Don't let him poison you against me. He's taking advantage of you while you're upset." He was trying to wedge himself between us, to redefine me as the villain, to undermine her decision by framing it as my manipulation. It was a classic Mark move. Never accept blame, just reframe the narrative. Anna looked at me. Her eyes were flashing with a new kind of fire. Not fear, but anger. Pure, un dilute danger. She walked to the door, her movements sharp and decisive. I thought she was going to yell at him. Instead, she took a deep breath, unlocked the door, and opened it. Mark's face, arranged in a mask of loving concern, faltered for a second when he saw her. He recovered quickly, holding out the roses. "Anna, baby, She didn't let him finish. She took the bouquet from his hands, her expression unreadable. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought she was going to accept them, that his performance was working. Then, calmly and deliberately, she turned the bouquet over and handed it back to him, flowers first. "No, Mark," she said, her voice utterly devoid of hysteria. It was the calmest, most powerful sound I had ever heard. "You don't get it. This isn't about being overwhelmed. This isn't a stunt. This is about me finally listening to that voice I've been screaming over for a year. The one telling me you don't see me at all." Mark stared at her, the roses dangling foolishly from his hand. He was speechless. No one had ever spoken to him with such blunt, unassailable clarity. "You see a picture," she went on, "and I was supposed to stand still in it. You wanted a wife, but you were never interested in the person who would have to fill that role. Liam," she glanced back at me for a fraction of a second. "Liam gave me a ride when I asked for one. He gave me a safe place to land. That's all. The rest of this is between you and me. And it's over." She held his gaze for a long, unwavering moment. "Goodbye, Mark." And with that, she gently closed the door in his face. The click of a lock sounded like a gunshot in the silent workshop. We stood there on opposite sides of the room, the space between us charged with the energy of her declaration. She had just closed the door on her old life, decisively and irrevocably. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't cried. She had simply spoken her truth. It was the most courageous thing I had ever witnessed. She leaned her back against the door, her eyes closed, and let out a long, shuddering breath. The strength that had carried her through the confrontation seemed to leave her all at once. I crossed the room and stood in front of her, not touching, just being there. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. She opened her eyes. They were shining with unshed tears, but also with a fierce, brilliant light. I think I'm going to be," she said. For the first time in a long time, the air between us was thick with unspoken things. We were no longer just a man who had offered a ride and a woman who had needed one. We were allies. We were partners in this strange, sudden upheaval of our lives. The what now that had been hanging in the air yesterday was now a pressing, tangible question. I had to find my brother. I had harbored his runaway bride. I was actively, willingly, an accomplice in the dismantling of his perfect life. And as I looked at Anna, at the strength and vulnerability warring in her face, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I wouldn't have it any other way. That evening, the workshop was quiet. The ghosts of the day's confrontations had retreated, leaving a stillness that felt earned. We ordered pizza from the one place that delivered this far out of town, an act so mundane it was almost comical given the circumstances. We ate it sitting on stools at my main workbench, using a roll of paper towels for napkins. In the soft glow of the work lights, surrounded by the tools of my trade, Anna seemed to relax for the first time since she climbed into my truck. She started asking me about my work, not in the polite, disinterested way other people did, but with genuine curiosity. "What's this?" she asked, running her fingers over the half-finished bookshelf. "It's a commission," I explained, "for a client in town. It's black walnut." I picked up a spare piece of the wood and handed it to her. "See the grain? How it has that deep, almost purple undertone. It's a beautiful wood to work with. Tricky, but beautiful." She studied the wood, turning it over in her hands, feeling its weight and texture. "How do you know what it's going to become?" she asked. "When you just have a raw piece of lumber, how do you see a bookshelf in it?" I found myself talking about my process, something I rarely did. I explained how you have to read the wood, understand its tensions and its strengths, how you can't force it to be something it's not. You have to work with its nature. "You have to listen to it," I said, and then stopped, realizing what I'd said. It was the very thing Mark had never done for her. She looked up from the piece of wood, her eyes meeting mine. "You're good at that, aren't you? Listening." I just shrugged, uncomfortable with the directness of the compliment. "It's my job." "I don't think it's just your job," she said softly. She put the wood down and looked around the workshop again at the order and the care evident in every corner. "This whole place, it's like a library of things you've listened to." No one had ever understood my work, my life, so intuitively. Clara called my shop my man cave, a place I retreated to. Mark called it my hobby that got out of hand. My parents saw it as a respectable but slightly baffling trade. Anna saw it as a library. She saw intention and conversation where others just saw wood and tools. We fell silent, the hum of the overhead lights filling the space. The pizza was gone. The day was ending. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind a raw, fragile intimacy. She broke the silence, her voice quiet but clear. "Why did you do it, Liam?" I knew exactly what she was asking. Not just why did you drive, but why did you do all of it? Why did you let me in? Why did you stand up to your brother? Why are you risking your family for a woman you barely know? I looked down at my hands. They were rough, calloused, with fine lines of ingrained sawdust that no amount of scrubbing could ever fully remove. They were hands that made things. They were not the hands of a poet or a salesman. They were honest hands. I decided to give her an honest answer. "Because," I began, my voice low. I had to clear my throat. "For about 5 years, ever since Claire left, everyone in my life has looked at me and seen someone predictable, safe, useful, A good piece of solid, boring furniture. I risked a glance at her. She was listening intently, her entire being focused on me. It's not that they were wrong. I continued, forcing myself to be truthful. I am those things. I am dependable. I like order, but it felt like that's all they saw. A function, a role to be played, the reliable brother, the responsible son, the safe bet. I took a breath. This was the hardest part to admit. When you climbed into my truck, you were desperate. You were terrified, but you weren't looking for someone safe. You were looking for a way out. You looked at me like I was a person who could actually do something, like I could be the opposite of safe. You saw an escape hatch. I finally lifted my head and met her gaze directly. Her eyes were dark and deep, and I felt like I could fall into them. And when you look at me in here, I said, my voice dropping when you talked about my work. You weren't seeing my brother's best man or a handyman who was helping you out of jam. You were just seeing me, the person who listens to the wood. I let out a shaky breath, the confession leaving me feeling exposed and vulnerable. I think I've been waiting for someone to see that for a very long time. The silence that followed was profound. It wasn't empty. It was full of everything I had just said, full of years of being misunderstood, of quiet resignation, of a loneliness I hadn't even fully admitted to myself. Anna didn't say anything. Instead, she slid off her stool and closed the small space between us. She was so close I could feel the warmth radiating from her. I could smell the faint scent of my coffee and her own clean, sweet scent. She reached out, not for my face or my shoulders, but for my hand. She took it in both of her own, her fingers tracing the calluses on my palm, the rough skin on my knuckles. It was an act of profound acceptance. She was touching the evidence of my life's work, the very things that made me who I was, and she wasn't flinching. You see things, Liam, she said, her voice a soft murmur. Her eyes were shining. The grain in the wood, the way things are meant to fit together. I think you see people that way too. You just don't say it out loud. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the quiet of the workshop. She lifted my hand and pressed her lips to the back of it, a gesture so tender and unexpected it stole the air from my lungs. Then she looked up at me, her face just inches from mine. Thank you for seeing me, too, she whispered. And then she leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a kiss of desperate passion or frantic relief. It was a kiss of recognition. It was slow and soft and deliberate, a conversation without words. It tasted of coffee and salt and a deep, soul-shaking rightness. It was the feeling of a perfectly fitted dovetail joint, two separate pieces clicking into place to become something whole and strong. In that one quiet kiss, in the sanctuary of my workshop, surrounded by the evidence of a life I had built alone, I felt the unmistakable sensation of no longer being lonely. The comfortable chair had finally found someone who didn't want to sit on it, but who wanted to know how it was made. And that changed everything. The days that followed the kiss were a strange and delicate dance. We were living in the same space, but in separate orbits that were slowly, inevitably drawing closer. Anna stayed in the upstairs apartment, and I kept to my workshop and my own small living quarters on the ground floor. But the lines blurred. She insisted on paying rent, a gesture I understood was about her own independence, not a transaction between us. She transferred money to my account, and I used it to buy groceries for both of us. It was our first unspoken collaboration. Small acts of domesticity began to stitch our lives together. I'd wake up and find a fresh pot of coffee already brewed, her way of saying thank you. I started making enough dinner for two without even thinking about it. One afternoon, I came inside to find she had borrowed a broom and swept the entire workshop floor, organizing the chaos of my day's work into neat piles of sawdust. It was a small thing, but it felt enormous. She wasn't just a guest anymore. She was starting to inhabit the space with me. She spent hours on the phone, dealing with the logistical fallout of her old life. She arranged with a friend to retrieve her belongings from Mark's house, her books, her clothes, her design portfolio. The friend dropped off a dozen boxes, which sat in a corner of the workshop like a refugee camp of her former self. One evening, I found her sitting on the floor, surrounded by open boxes, looking lost. "I don't know where to put any of this," she said, gesturing to the piles of books and clothes. "There's no room." The apartment upstairs was furnished sparsely, with my own minimal possessions. It didn't have a proper bookshelf. "I can fix that," I said. The next day, I put aside the commission I was working on. I went to my lumber rack and selected several long, beautiful boards of bird's-eye maple. I spent the day in the shop, the hum of the saws and the scent of cut wood filling the air. It felt different working on this. It wasn't for a client. It was for her. It was for us. She watched me for a while from the top of the stairs, her chin resting on her hands. She didn't say anything, just observed the process, the measuring, the cutting, the sanding. I felt her gaze on me, but it wasn't pressure. It was a quiet, steady presence that made my work feel more meaningful. By the end of the day, a tall, elegant bookshelf stood finished in the center of the room. It was simple, clean-lined, designed to let the beauty of the wood speak for itself. "It's for upstairs," I said, wiping a sheen of sweat from my forehead. "For your books." She came down the stairs and walked slowly around it, running her hand over the impossibly smooth surface. She looked at the joints, the seamless way the shelves fit into the uprights. "Liam," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "it's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever made for me." She looked up at me, her eyes shining. "Mark once bought me a diamond bracelet for my birthday. I think it cost more than my car. It felt like a payment. This," she touched the wood again, "this feels like a gift." We carried it upstairs together, our hands brushing as we maneuvered it into place against the wall. And then we spent the next hour unpacking her books, filling the shelves. It felt like we were building a home. Her history and my handiwork coming together to create something new. A week after the wedding that wasn't, I knew we needed to get out of the barn. We had been living in a bubble, a fortress against the world. But if this thing between us was going to be real, it had to be able to survive in the sunlight. "I'm taking you on a date," I announced one morning over coffee. She raised an eyebrow. "A date? Are you sure the world is ready for that? I'm still technically a runaway bride. There might be wanted posters." Her humor was one of my favorite things about her. It was dry and sharp, a tool she used to deflect pain and find her balance. "I'm willing to risk it," I said, "but we're not going anywhere fancy. No restaurants. No crowds." That afternoon, I packed a thermos of the good coffee she liked and made a couple of sandwiches. Simple food for a simple plan. I told her to wear comfortable shoes. We climbed into my truck, the same truck that had been her getaway car. But this time, she didn't get in the back. She slid into the passenger seat, right next to me. It felt right. I drove us out of town, heading up into the hills that overlooked the valley. I took a winding, little-used fire road that led to a scenic overlook I discovered years ago. It was a place I came to think, a place I had never shared with anyone, not even Claire. I parked the truck at the edge of bluff. The view was breathtaking. The whole valley spread out below us, a patchwork of fields and forests, the town a toy set in the distance. We didn't get out. We just sat on the tailgate, our legs dangling, the sandwiches and the thermos between us. The air was clean and cool, and the only sound was the wind sighing through the pines. "This is your spot, isn't it?" she said, her voice soft. "It is," I admitted. "It's where I come when the sawdust gets to be too much." We sat there and we talked. Really talked. Not about Mark, not about the wedding, but about everything else. She told me about growing up in a house where everything was about achievement, about her dream of starting her own graphic design firm, but never feeling like she had the confidence to do it. She told me about her ex before Mark, a musician who had called her ambitions cute and belittled her talent, which was why Mark's grand pronouncements of belief in her had been so seductive at first. She'd been starved for support, and she'd mistaken his possessive pride for it. I found myself telling her about Claire, but not just the breakup. I told her about the slow, creeping realization that we were speaking different languages. How I had tried to show my love by building her a garden bed or fixing the rattling noise in her car, and how she had seen those acts not as affection, but as utility. "You're so good at doing things," she would say, and I slowly realized it was a consolation prize. She made me feel like my hands were only good for fixing things, not for holding someone. I said, the admission tasting like rust in my mouth. It was a secret shame I had never spoken aloud. Anna was quiet for a long time, just looking out at the view. Then she reached over and took my hand, the same one she had kissed in the workshop. She didn't say anything. She just held it. And in that simple, silent gesture, she refuted years of self-doubt. She made my hand feel like it was for holding again. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, a comfortable silence settled between us. We were just two people on a hillside, sharing a view, but it felt like so much more. It felt like the beginning of a real story, not just the end of an old one. I have to ask, she said, breaking the quiet. Your family. Have you spoken to them? I shook my head. My mother has left a dozen voicemails, alternating between crying and fury. My father left one very stiff message telling me to rectify the situation, and Mark has been silent since he was here last, which is somehow more menacing than his yelling. I'm sorry, Liam, she said, her voice full of genuine regret. I've put you in an impossible position. No, I said, turning to look at her. The setting sun caught the highlights in her hair. You didn't put me here. I drove here. I stood at the door. I built the bookshelf. These are my choices, Anna, not just yours. It was the truest thing I had ever said. This wasn't something that had happened to me. It was something I was actively participating in every single day. I was choosing this, over the quiet, safe life I had been resigned to. I'm scared, she admitted in a small voice, looking down at her joined hands. Of what comes next? I have no job, no apartment. My whole life is in boxes in your workshop. You have a place to stay, I said firmly, for as long as you need it, and you're a talented designer. You'll find work, or you'll start your own firm. You can do that. She looked up at me, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. You really think so? I know so, I said. I've seen your portfolio. It's brilliant. You just need to listen to yourself the way you listen to a client. You know what you're doing. A slow smile spread across her face. You sound like you're talking about wood. Maybe I am. I smiled back. Good design, good woodworking. It's all the same. It's about honesty. Honesty to the material, honesty to the purpose. She leaned her head on my shoulder, a comfortable, trusting weight. I like it here, she whispered, on the tailgate of this truck. With you. Me too, I said, my arm going around her instinctively. It felt as natural as breathing. We stayed like that until the stars came out bright and cold in the clear country sky. The world was still out there. The angry brother, the disappointed parents, the uncertain future. But up on that hill, with Anna's head on my shoulder and the vast, quiet universe spread out before us, none of it seemed to matter as much. We were in our own bubble again, but this time it wasn't a hideout. It was a world of our own making. And for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. 1 year later, the workshop smells the same. Sawdust, coffee, and the faint, sweet scent of Anna's shampoo, which has become a permanent part of the olfactory landscape. The light slants in through the high windows, illuminating the dancing dust motes just as it did the day she first arrived. But everything is different. The corner where her wedding dress lay in a defeated heap is now occupied by a sleek, modern drafting table. Her drafting table. On the wall above it are pinned sketches, color palettes, and logos for Anna Lane Design, her one-woman firm, which is not just a dream anymore, but a thriving reality. She has clients. A waiting list, even. She works from the apartment upstairs, which is no longer just the apartment upstairs, it's home. Our home. I'm at my workbench, sanding the top of a large dining table, a commission for a family downtown. The repetitive motion is meditative. My hands glide over the wood, feeling for the slightest imperfection. A year ago, this work was my entire world. Now, it's the peaceful foundation upon which a much larger, brighter world has been built. The fallout with my family was as bad as I had expected, and then it settled into something quieter and sadder. My father and I have spoken a handful of times, our conversations stilted and formal, circling the massive topic we both refused to address. My mother calls every few weeks, her tone wavering between wounded and cautiously inquisitive, asking about my situation as if Anna is a temporary weather condition. And Mark, I haven't spoken to my brother in a year. I see him sometimes when I'm in town, a fleeting glimpse of his fancy car or his tailored suit. We exist in the same small city, but in different universes. The chasm between us is too wide to be bridged by a simple apology because I'm not sorry. I have lost a brother, but I have found myself. It's a brutal equation, but it's the truth. The floorboards creak on the staircase. I look up. Anna is coming down, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She's wearing an old t-shirt of mine and a pair of leggings. And to me, she is the most beautiful woman in the world. She navigates the workshop with a familiar ease, stepping over power cords and around stacks of lumber without a second thought. This is her space now, too. Thought you might need this, she says, handing me a mug. She leans against the workbench, her hip brushing against mine. Thanks, I say, taking a sip. It's perfect, of course. She knows exactly how I like it. She watches me work for a moment, a small, contemplative smile on her face. It's a look I know well. It's the look she gets when she's happy. Remember when this place felt like a hideout? She asks, her voice soft. I stop sanding and look around the big, open room, at her drafting table in the corner, at the ridiculously oversized fern she insisted on buying, which now dominates a sunny spot by the window, at the 2 pairs of muddy boots by the door, mine and hers. Yeah, I say, a smile spreading across my face. I remember. Now it feels like home, she says, finishing my thought. She reaches out and brushes a fine layer of sawdust from my cheek, her touch gentle. You've got a little bit of the job on your face. I catch her hand and hold it, turning my head to kiss her palm. It's a permanent condition. We stand there for a moment in the quiet morning light, surrounded by the life we've built. It's not a loud life. It's not a roller coaster. It's a life of shared coffee, the low hum of machinery, the scratch of a pencil on paper, and the comfortable silence of 2 people who understand each other without needing to speak. It's a life as solid and as real as the wood under my hands. I look from her face to the table I'm building, a place where another family will gather, and then back to her. The pieces of my life, which had once felt so separate, the work, the solitude, the quiet ache of being misunderstood, have finally come together. She was the missing piece, the one who made it all make sense. I spent my whole life building things for other people, I say, my voice low and full of a gratitude that still sometimes overwhelms me. Tables, chairs, houses, things to fill their lives. I pull her closer, my other arm wrapping around her waist. She fits against me perfectly. It wasn't until I whisper, my lips against her hair, that I felt like I was finally building something for myself. She looks up at me, her eyes deep and shining with a love that I now know I am worthy of. Good, she says, her smile brilliant, because I'm not going anywhere. She kisses me, then, a kiss that tastes like coffee and home and the beautiful, sturdy, dependable promise of 1,000 more mornings just like this one. And in her arms, I am no longer the safe choice or the escape hatch. I'm simply home, just as she is mine. What would you have done if you were in his shoes? Would you have driven away, knowing it could tear your family apart? Sometimes the biggest risks lead to the greatest rewards. Have you ever had to make a choice between loyalty and your own gut feeling? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next.